Welcome back, everybody. It's Mr. Christiano Reads. This week, I'm going to be reading another Dav Pilkey book. Well, the reason why is because the first two were pretty fun. So I figured I'd continue on with his Captain Underpants series. So this week, I'm going to read Captain Underpants and the Invasion of the Incredibly Naughty Cafeteria Ladies from Outer Space, and the subsequent assault of the equally evil lunchroom zombie nerds. Alright, so here we go. Let's start Captain Underpants, Novel 3. Chapter 1, George and Harold. This is George Beard and Harold Hutchins. George is the kid on the left with the tie and the flat top. Harold is the one on the right with the t-shirt and the bad haircut. Remember them now? If you were looking for a few words to describe George and Harold, you might come up with kind, friendly, smart, determined, and deep. Just ask their principal, Mr. Krupp. He'll tell you that George and Harold are kinda funny looking, smart Alex, who are determined to drive everybody off the deep end. So there's all our vocabulary words. But don't listen to him. George and Harold are actually very clever and good-hearted boys. Their only problem is they're fourth graders, and at George and Harold's school, fourth graders are expected to sit still and pay attention for 7 hours a day. George and Harold are just not very good at that. And we know that from the last two books. So let's see what kind of trouble they get into today. The only good thing George and Harold are good at is being silly. Unfortunately, George and Harold's silliness gets them into trouble every now and then. Sometimes it gets them into a lot of trouble. And one time it got them into so much trouble, it almost caused the entire Earth to be destroyed by an army of evil giant evil zombie nerds. Before I can tell you that story, I have to tell you this story. Excuse me. End of chapter 1. See, the boys changed that sign. What kind of trouble are they going to get into now? Chapter 2, The Evil Space Guys. One dark, clear night in Piqua, Ohio, a flaming object was seen streaking across the midnight sky. It shone brightly for a second or two, then fizzled out just above Jerome Horowitz Elementary School. Nobody gave it a second thought. The next day, everything seemed pretty normal. Nobody noticed anything different about the school. Nobody paid attention to the roof. And of course, nobody looked up and said, "Hey, what's that big spaceship thingy doing on the roof of the school?" Perhaps if they had, the horrible ordeal that followed might never have happened, and you wouldn't be sitting here reading about it now. But they didn't. It did. And well, we are here. As we can all plainly see, there was a spaceship on top of the building. And inside that spaceship were 3 of the most evil, hideous, merciless spacemen ever to set foot on the roof of a small Midwestern elementary school. Their names were Zorks, Clax, and Jennifer. Their mission? To take over planet Earth. "First," said Zorks, "we must find a way to infiltrate the school. Then," said Clax, "we will turn all the children into giant super-powered evil zombie nerds." "Finally," said Jennifer, "we will use them to take over the world." Zorks and Clax laughed and laughed. "Silence, you fools," barked Jennifer. "If our plan is to work, we must wait until it's narratively convenient. In the meantime, we must watch their every move on our trinoclops. Uh-oh. This is getting interesting. Chapter 3. Fun with Science. Early the same morning, George and Harold were sitting in their 10:15 science class making silly noises. Meow. George meowed softly without moving his lips. Roar, growled Harold without moving his mouth. There it is again, exclaimed their science teacher, Mr. Fried. I distinctly heard a cat and a dog in here. We didn't hear anything, the children said, trying not to laugh. I must be hearing things again, Mr. Fried worried. Maybe you should leave and go see a doctor, said George with concern. I can't, said Mr. Fried. Today is the day of the big volcano experiment. The children all groaned. Mr. Fried's science experiments were usually the most idiotic things on earth. They almost never worked and were always boring. But today's experiment was different. Mr. Fried brought in a large, fake-looking volcano that he had made out of paper mache. He filled the volcano with a box of ordinary baking soda. Baking soda is also called sodium bicarbonate, explained Mr. Fried. Meow. Said Mr. Fried. Did any of you children just hear, never mind. Mr. Fried opened the bottle of clear liquid. Now watch what happens when I pour vinegar into the baking soda, he said. Uh-oh. What's going to happen? The children watched as the tiny volcano started to rumble. Soon a large glob of foamy goop spurted out the top. The goop poured over the desk and dripped onto the floor, creating a huge mess. Oops, said Mr. Fried. I guess I used too much baking soda. George and Harold were stunned. How did you do that? Asked Harold. Well, said Mr. Fried, the vinegar acts as a liberating agent which releases the gaseous carbonate radical element of sodium bicarbonate. Meow. Mr. Fried paused. Excuse me, children? I've got to go see a doctor. Uh-oh. The boys have got Mr. Fried all flustered. Mr. Fried put on his coat and hurried out the door. George and Harold got up and studied the messy volcano experiment with great interest. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Asked George. I think I'm thinking what you're thinking, said Harold. And there we have it. And that's the end of chapter 3. So they've officially got Mr. Hyde to go to the doctor. Chapter 4. The Setup. After school, the boys raced to George's house and got down to business. There they go on their skateboards. George and Harold sat down and began creating a bogus cupcake recipe. We'll just add a box of baking soda and a bottle of vinegar to this recipe, said George. And whoever makes the cupcakes will get a big surprise. Let's add 2 boxes of baking soda and 2 bottles of vinegar to the recipe, said Harold. That way, they'll get an even bigger surprise. Good idea, laughed George. All right, and there we have it, chapter 4. So I'm going to stop there today, and I'll pick up with the rest tomorrow. So there you have it. That was chapters 1 through 4 in Captain Underpants and the invasion of the incredible, naughty cafeteria ladies from outer space. And we'll see what happens with the boys. So they've officially gotten Mr. Fide to go to the doctor because they were making sounds. So he thinks he's hearing sounds in his head. And they've learned a new experiment with baking soda and vinegar. Let's see what happens. Have a great day, and we'll catch you tomorrow. Bye, everybody.